Hello and welcome to the Gameline Wales Online's rugby show, going out on Facebook Live and YouTube and a little later on in podcast form. I'm your host, Ben James, and I'm joined by Simon Thomas and Matthew Southcombe. It's another busy day in Welsh rugby. As always, you're probably used to them by now. A team announcement. Wayne Pivac's made 13 changes to his team to face Georgia this weekend. So let's get straight into it, guys. Matt, what do we make of this team then?
Well, he stuck to his guns, Wayne Pivac, to give him credit. It would have been very easy for him to say, I'm going to have to change my plans here and go with a stronger team. He said all along that this was going to be the occasion where he looked at the rest of his squad, gave guys opportunities, and I think he deserves a certain degree of credit for sticking to his plans. I know we'll come on to things in a bit more detail later on in the show, but it's not necessarily the way I would have gone with it completely. And I'm sure some of the viewers will have seen the piece I wrote earlier this week on my thoughts on the whole thing. I thought perhaps there was room to give the sort of the first team, if you like, more time together on the field. But you can't deny that this is a very exciting game now on the weekend. It's really interesting to see, which players take to international rugby. A lot of four debutants in the team, 2 players making their first start. You can't deny that it's a really exciting prospect now to see how these guys go on the weekend. But if they lose again, which is not out of the question, this could blow up in his face a little bit. The pressure will mount, but you've got to say it is an exciting team, and it's exciting to see what they can do.
Absolutely, Simon. I suppose, what's your initial impressions of the team? It was fairly heavily trailed yesterday, so we had a decent idea of what it was going to be heading into today. So no, not a massive surprise, but as Matt says, it's very much a new look team, isn't it?
Well, the first thing I want to say, Ben, is that I would like to assure the viewers that this is the real me. After my Twitter hacking incident of the weekend, you might think this is possibly a clone, but no, it's me. Happy to be here in my real form and interested to see this team as well. It's bold, isn't it? What it reminds me of a little bit is 2003 when Wales were going into the World Cup and they're on the back of, I think, a 10-match losing run. Steve Hansen, the coach at the time, was under enormous pressure. I was basically told that going into the warm-up game against Scotland that if Wales lost, that was going to be his job gone. But he had a plan, a pre-arranged plan to look at the depth of his squad, try out a few new players, and he stuck to that team. It would have been easy to sort of backtrack and put the strongest team out to try and secure his job, but he stuck to his guns. They won, and the rest is history. He went on to a reasonable coaching career, Mr. Hansen. And it's a similar story now because there's a lot of pressure on Wayne Pivac after 6 matches on the trot, 6 defeats. And but he has clearly stuck to his plan largely. This was a decision all along. This was the game where a lot of new players and squad players and fringe figures are going to get a game, and that's what we're seeing. 3 new caps in the starting lineup, a 4th one going to come off the bench. Lots of new combinations, exciting and bold. But bold in 2 senses, because as Matt rightly says, if it comes unstuck, well, it's just going to add fuel to the fire of criticism of him. But there's a lot of players that I'm excited to see play, particularly looking forward to seeing Johnny Williams. Actually spoke to him. He's obviously delighted at his selection. It's a fascinating story. Grew up in England, born in England, schooled in Berkshire and Surrey. Played all his rugby in England before this summer. Played for England under 20s. Played for England's senior side against the Barbars, but of course that was an uncapped game, which meant he was still eligible for Wales, who qualifies through from his father, who's from Rhyl, and now he's in the side. And he was very much stressing that he considers himself Welsh. He's proud to be playing for Wales, and the full name of Johnny Bledin Rhys Williams says it all. And Ben, you've spoken to him as well. And 12 has been a position that's been hard to fill since Hadley Parkes went to Japan, or headed for Japan. And now this is a big opportunity for Johnny Williams. Big opportunity in the centre all round, especially with Jonathan Davis having an injury, which might well keep him out the rest of the campaign. So that's one of a number of positions I'm particularly looking forward to see how that Sheedy, Williams, Tompkins midfield works.
I think that's probably the best place to start is the back line, isn't it? We got a comment here from Dean Williams, says know that the back line is inexperienced, but excited to see how they go, especially, as you mentioned, Williams and Tompkins in the centre. I think I saw a stat earlier today. It's 63 starts in that entire Welsh back division, and 58 of those come from Liam Williams. A lot of boys making their first starts, so it's going to be interesting to see how they go. Matt, what did you make of the back three? I mean, Louis Rees-Zammit gets the start that I think the whole of Wales has been clamouring for. Liam's back to 15, and Johnny McNicholl straight into the side after being called up earlier this week.
Yeah, I think it's a good back three. I think it gives Liam Williams a chance to have a run in that 15 shirt that he so desperately wants to make his own. He's made no secret in the past of him, favouring that position. And I think, as I said in my verdict earlier today, that I think if he plays well, it really gives Pivac a decision to make at 15, because, Lee Halfpenny has been fantastic at what he does, which primarily is cover the backfield and defend really, really well and kick his goals. What Liam Williams has over him is that counter-attacking ability, which, puts fans on the edge of their seat, and, it's what everybody wants to see. So it gives him an opportunity there to sort of put his case forward for the England game. I think, looking at the wings, I think it was inevitable, really, that Johnny McNicholl was going to come in. Same with both of them, I guess, because they weren't going to be called up out of nowhere just to hold tackle bags. They were always going to be involved. I think Pivac really likes McNicholl. I know you've done a few pieces in the past, Ben, that explain just how important he is to the way that Wayne Pivac wants to play. He played really well for the Scarlets against Connaught. I don't think he's taken to Test rugby particularly well in the opportunities that he's had so far. So it's going to be interesting to see how he adapts on Saturday. I think he'd have to play really, really well to force his way into the side to face England the following week. But it's not beyond him. And as for Louis Rees-Zammit, as you touched on there, everybody wants to see this. I just hope that he gets his hands on the ball, because the backs at large, let alone the wingers, have been redundant, to use Shane Williams' words earlier this week, because they simply haven't had the ball, and they haven't had quality ball. They've not been able to showcase what they can do. If he plays well and he sees a lot of the ball, it's going to be all about getting his hands on the ball. If he gets as many touches as he can, chances are he's going to do something with it. Spoke to Warren Gatland for a different piece a few weeks back, and he said the magic number for wingers is 15 touches. If they get 15 touches, chances are they'll have had a big impact on the game. So that's what he should be looking for. Get him on the ball as much as possible. Otherwise, it probably doesn't, if we fall into what we've seen the last few weeks and he doesn't see any of the ball, then he's not able to really put his case forward to feature later on in this campaign. So, it's a really exciting selection. You just need to see him given that sort of opportunity to really express himself.
There was a nice line, actually, because Lewis has been on as well talking. It was an good piece tonight, but just one little thing, which I don't think it's bringing too much. He just said that it only feels like last year he was playing for his college side, and he stopped himself and said, well, actually it was only last year. So it's been a weird one for him, because it's happened really quickly, and he's also had to wait, hasn't he? Because he burst on the scene so fast, and within a matter of weeks, people were calling for him to be in the Wales side, and then he was called into the Six Nations group. Didn't get any game time in the Six Nations. Obviously, then you have rugby going into shutdown with the pandemic. Has his debut against France. Then, as a brief cameo off the bench there. Then obviously picks up the shin splint. So he's had to wait a little while. So you could tell today how keen he was. And I think the whole nation's keen to see him play. And there's a lot of firepower in that back division. I watched the Scarlets game against Connaught, covered that in the weekend, and McNicholl was absolutely on fire. The combination he had with Ryan Combier there for a couple of the first tries, and the way he counter-attacked for the third, Scarlets try. He looked like a player really back to his very best. Matt's right, it hasn't quite clicked from an international level. But you look at that back three now, McNichol, Liam Williams and Lewis Rees-Zammit. I mean, there is pace to burn there and attacking flair aplenty, creativity as well. And you're right, you just want to see them get some ball in their hands. And if there is a new way under Wayne Pivac still being evolved, because he talked about trying to change after 10 years of a certain style, well, this is perhaps the first time we've seen a team really in that mold. Because you look through that side and two open sides essentially, huge amount of pace, young attacking-minded backs, footballing centres. Maybe this is the way, the new way forward. So let's see where it goes.
One thing to just jump in on there, Ben, as well. I spoke to Josh Adams at the start of the season. I think it was after the squad was announced, actually. And he was asked who's the fastest in the Wales squad. And he said it would be a foot race between Louis Rees-Zammit and Johnny McNichol. So, you know, that's perhaps a sign of things to come and the potential that they have. But just as a final point on the back line, I did notice a comment there that reminded me, sorry, I didn't see who it was from, but you know, if we get bad weather on Saturday, if it becomes a forward-orientated game, or if Wales can't get on top, like they've struggled to in the last few weeks, you know, this back line is going to have to play off the back foot, and that's going to be a real challenge. And it will undermine everything we've just talked about. So it's crucial that they get a platform.
Absolutely. One final point on McNichol, and it brings us on to James Botham as well. It's a comment here from Jamie Phillips. Calls it an interesting team, but he asks, is it really fair that McNichol and Botham have been parachuted straight in ahead of the likes of Jonah Holmes and James Davis, who have been within the squad throughout? Obviously, Botham slightly different because, as Pivac revealed today, he has been in and around the squad for a number of weeks, albeit not in an official capacity. But besides, is that fair, or what's your thoughts on that?
Well, you look at it, you've actually got three people starting this weekend who weren't in the original squad. In McNichol, Botham, and also Elliot T. And obviously you've had two starts already for Shane Lewis-Hughes, who wasn't in the original squad. So it's been very fluid, and you know, it's been sort of a development as it's gone along, and perhaps to an extent a realization that maybe the original squad wasn't exactly what was required. We'll go through them one by one. I think McNichol, if he had been fit, would have been in the squad originally. He's overcome his ankle injury and come back in. As you say, Pivac, he was important for him at the Scarlets, so you certainly can understand that one. He probably would have been ahead of Jonah Holmes in the pecking order of fit. Botham's a slightly different one. Botham's only played 13 games for Cardiff Blues, and really up until rugby's return in August, been very limited in his appearances for them. Wasn't in the squad, and now he's starting. But then again, he's starting at 6, isn't he? So it's not a case that he's playing at 7 ahead of James Davis. To a certain extent. Pivac did say today that he could have gone with maybe Tipuric and James. But I think in terms of looking for the balance and retaining Tipuric at 7, if you then look at the options at 6, if you're going to give Shane Lewis-Hughes a break because he looks like he's frontline to start against England, if you're going to give him a break, then who else comes in at 6? Navidi's not ready after his concussion. Moriarty, you wonder if he's going to be involved at all during the autumn, because every time he comes back, apparently he aggravates his ankle. You could have had Wainwright at 6, but the Falcons is out with a little knee tweak, so you need Wainwright at 8. So in terms of the options at 6, both of them who can play right across the back row and for whom tackling is a huge part of his game, you can understand what would happen at 6. So when you look at them like that, most of the things do make sense. But I suppose it just shows really that you can start a campaign. These days, you just really can't be sure how it's going to end up, can you? Because there is such much change along the way, and it will be fascinating, in particular for me, to see how James Botham goes. I've seen a lot of him coming through the age grade, and I've probably seen all his games for Cardiff Blues, and he is an absolute workaholic, a bit like Shane Lewis-Hughes, good over the ball as well, great attitude, and he doesn't have the worst sporting genes.
I think I'd be annoyed, Ben. To be perfectly honest, I know Jonah Holmes was mentioned there. With the James Botham one, I can understand it, and I understood it when it happened because, as we've touched on, Wales have got issues there. They've got injuries in the back row, and they probably need that cover. But Wales have got a lot of back three players in this squad, and I didn't feel like McNichol was a necessity. Jonah Holmes will be sat there now thinking, well, hang on. I'm sure when he was selected in the squad, he will have looked at this game and thought, right, that's my chance. And now McNichol's been drafted in and thrown straight in ahead of him. Like, I wasn't a big fan of that. I think the regions are going to be a little bit annoyed with the way that this campaign has been handled as well. I got the impression from John Mulvihill that he was not overly thrilled with the way that Lloyd Williams was called up, something like 24 hours before their game. I think it was against Munster. Might be wrong in that, but I think it was Munster. I was covering it. And then obviously with the way James Botham was called up, was supposed to start on Monday night, suddenly he's not in the squad. There's already Cardiff Blues fans saying, in the wake of Rhys Patchell's injury coming to light, that they expect Jared Evans to be called up 15 minutes before their game on the weekend. I don't feel like McNichol was a necessity. I think it's harsh on a few of the players who were in the squad. And if you're a Scarlets fan or the Scarlets coaching staff, you're probably looking at it wondering, well, was this really required? I think it's harsh on Jonah Holmes. I got to be honest. He's not had a lot of opportunity during his time. He's been in a lot of squads, but not seen a lot of game time. And I think he'll be a little bit miffed at the way this has been handled.
I think possibly, Matt, do you not think that maybe this is an indication that McNichol could actually be involved against England? Because if you look, say you're going to go with 4 back 3 players against England, you say Liam Williams and Josh Adams are pretty much nailed on as long as Liam shows he's ready and fit this weekend. And then after that, I would probably say that McNichol and Halfpenny, unless Luis Rizamid absolutely demands selection with the performance this weekend, I could see McNichol being involved against England. Whereas realistically, I could never really see Jonah Holmes being involved against England. So perhaps it's just it's an extent, it's a reflection of that and a reflection of how much Pivac does rate and value McNichol.
Yeah, I think there's probably an element of truth to that. I've always had the impression that McNichol is one of Pivac's favourites. When he was called up in the past, he is so Pivac referring to him as Johnny Mac, and it was all a bit matey, and they obviously know each other well from their time at the Scarlets together. So I do get the impression that McNichol is a favourite of Pivac's. As we touched on, there is a lot to be said for him being very important to the way Wales play or want to play. So if he plays well against Georgia, wouldn't surprise me if he does get a run out against England. But I just think it's harsh because he missed the. It was bad luck for him initially. Probably would have been named in the squad, but I think Jonah Holmes will probably be a bit aggrieved. I think he's got grounds to.
I tell you one thing you touched on there about suggestion that the regions wouldn't be too happy. You won't get anybody to say that too publicly in any strong form. You talk to them privately, and I don't think they're best enamoured.
No.
If you look at the number of players, Wales are getting close. High 30s number of players involved.
Yeah.
And there's been very few players released back to actually play for the regions. You've got one that looks like it's just going to be the one this week in Georgia North. Majority are being kept, and obviously it coinciding with the time where the regions are not receiving the payments from WRU in return for player access, which they were expecting to get because of the financial problems caused by the pandemic, and they're receiving a loan which they've got to pay back, money which they're expecting to receive from the union. So, yeah, I mean, you look at Cardiff Blues for a little example. They're missing 7 back row players as they head to Leinster this weekend. 3 with Wales, 4 out injured. It's not making life that easy for the regions, to be honest.
Just enjoy it.
So there'll be a few youngsters getting their a taste of Dublin and everything that playing Leinster away from home involves. And it's a tricky time. You can understand Wales, especially under pressure, wanting to retain players. But then you look at it, especially after this weekend, there are a number of players you would imagine perhaps this will be their only involvement in the autumn. Now, if you don't, after this, see players returning to help out our pro teams, then you could certainly understand, but they'd be extremely miffed.
I suppose maybe a strange thing is the fact that we don't know who the final game is against. That might hinder whether Pivac thinks he can release certain players, because you could either be playing France or Italy, so it could either be a tough test match or another sort of Georgia-esque development match.
I mean, it's going to realistically be Italy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Realistically.
I mean, without trying to be too down on it, are Fiji going to play a game in this tournament? That's up in the air. If Wales lose on Saturday, they could have no opponent.
Yeah, I mean, you could
That's a scenario.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. If Wales lose against Georgia, then if Wales lose against Georgia, everything changes.
Okay, let's focus then on the front five, because that's largely been one of the main issues in terms of setting a platform in the first three games. Obviously, playing against Georgia, you're always wary about what their pack are going to do. You think back a couple of years, the 13-6 game in Cardiff, where Georgia really did a number on Wales at the scrum. We've probably seen a Welsh front five selected for this game, especially in terms of the props, that seems better suited to taking Georgia on in the scrum. Would you agree, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, you put Alan Wynne-Jones in there instead of Seb Davis. I think it's a better front five than has played so far. I think Wynne-Jones probably should have started in Ireland for me. I know it's easy to say that after the way things transpired, but there were a few people saying that when the team was announced for that game. So I think and particularly as you touched on, it's a better scrummaging unit. Seb Davis probably losing a bit of weight to someone like Alan Wynne-Jones, but Jake Ball is a big guy. Wynne-Jones and Samson Lee renowned for their scrummaging. That's why they're picked, really. Although I think Samson Lee is getting a lot better in the loose in the last 12 months. But I like that front five a lot. I've never been Seb Davis's biggest fan, but I think he's come on a lot. And I think some time. When they messed around with him in the back row and things like that, I don't think that's helped him a lot. I think he can be a really good second row. And I think Pivac will like him for his athleticism and just what he offers around the field. He is probably like, a 5.5. He's not quite the back rower, maybe not an out-and-out second row. He's somewhere in the middle. But, I think he's got a lot to offer, and it's a big opportunity for him. So, in terms of the front five and taking on the Georgians, I think that's probably a better scrummaging unit than the side that faced Ireland.
And there's probably an argument if a Navidi or a Moriarty was fit and you could fit them somewhere into this back row, that this is probably the most balanced pack we've seen in terms of having two open sides in the back row to really go after Jackal. Maybe, Wainwright, he looks like he could make a decent 8 at test level, but in terms of the complete pack, this maybe looks like most balanced and best pack for Pivac's game plan that we've seen all autumn.
Yeah, I mean, if everyone is available, I mean, your back row, going to what you touched on then, I think you're looking at Navidi and Tiperic, and then either Moriarty or Faletau. And those would be the four, with like Shane Lewis, who's banging at the door, hope maybe James Botham banging at the door for this weekend. So you can see where the strength is there, and you've got a nice balance for the younger back row this weekend. On Seb Davis, I've seen a lot of Seb, and he's been excellent actually since rugby returned. And if you look at the Scarlet side that Pivac won the Pro 12 with, one of the most pivotal fundamental figures in that team was Tyg Byrne. Now, to my mind, Seb Davis is the closest we've got in Welsh rugby to him in terms of his athleticism. Also, he's very good with the ball. And the other thing that Seb has is excellent leap at the line out. He's one of the best, if I can put it, attacking defensive line out forwards in terms of looking to steal opposition ball. And his partnership with Corey Hill early season for the Blues has looked really good. And if Pivac is looking to play a game where he puts a huge emphasis on skill and athleticism, particularly in the forwards, then Seb ticks that box. I think to have him in that, what you probably need him surrounded with is quite a lot of grunt, certainly in the front five. And you probably got that with Jake Ball alongside him. You know, it was Mr. Grunt for me. You know, in terms of what he brings with his power scrummaging, and also the way he hits rucks and more he hurts people. So you've got a front three there, a front row, which to me is a real sign of respect and an acknowledgement of the traditional scrummaging strengths of the Georgians. Probably the best scrummaging loose head. Wyn Jones was #1 at the World Cup. You've got revitalised Samson Lee on the tight head, and Elliot D strong in the scrum as well. Big opportunity for Elliot, left out of the autumn initially. Now has kind of leapt from fourth at the start of the autumn, if you like, to maybe first choice, because he's got this game ahead of Sam Parry. You think Ryan Elias will have slipped down the pecking order after a very tough time out in Ireland. So that's a position up for grabs. And that, I think, looking at the game as a whole, Matt and Ben, what I'm interested in is, Pivac said this was a pre-planned selection, obviously injuries pending. So this was always kind of what he was looking to do for this game. But how planned is his selection against England? How firm in his mind right now is he of his starting 15 against England? And just how many places are really up for grabs? Squad players, fringe players who are getting a go this weekend? That's the bit I'd really like to get inside the Pivac mind and know. And you look at the centre, for example. Jonathan Davis might not be involved again this autumn. Could this be the centre pairing against England? The front row, could this be the front row against England? What they're going to do at halfback? If Sheedy has a really good game, makes things happen, then the other side of the coin is, if these players make things happen against what is patently and obviously a poor Georgian team, which it might turn out to be because they haven't been great in their games so far against Scotland and England that I've seen, how much context and how much importance do you place in this game? Either way it goes, it's going to be some fascinating selection calls and decisions ahead of the England game.
I suppose this is the thing. You're seeing a lot of comments here about Pivac is being disrespectful to Georgia, naming a weakened side, shouldn't be resting so many players. And there's comments about, do we even know what the game plan is? But as you mentioned there, Simon, the flip side of this is potentially moving forward, these are the sort of players who could implement the new game plan rather than the established names that we've seen for the first three games.
Could be a watershed moment, Ben.
It genuinely could, and I suppose it is like you mentioned. It's that Hansen moment. Is it? This is the moment where Pivac's, albeit it probably won't be Georgia, it'll be the England selection in a week's time. But this is maybe the moment where Pivac defines what his Welsh reign is going to be, in terms of.
I don't know if Matt agrees, but I think if you're going to fail doing it your way. With the players you think, with the players you think can implement your game plan. Go out in a blaze of glory, isn't it?
Yeah, as I touched on at the start, you've got to give him credit for sticking to his guns. You talk about this being a planned move from the start, which it was, obviously. I don't think he would have planned for the three performances that have come before. And in my book, I would rather, I think it's a desirable quality to have, to be able to adapt your plans. There's no way you would have planned for the autumn to have been going this badly. It's tough because you've got to accept it would have been easy for him to fold and go against his values and his beliefs. Clearly, he stuck to his guns, but I think it's good to see if a coach be able to adapt those plans when things aren't happening the way that they'd hoped. And I don't buy the disrespect line. At the end of the day, if Georgia were historically a better side, Wales would be fielding a better team. There is, I think it's more than justified that he can look at his squad, in an international match. I remember Warren Gatland getting a lot of stick for making 12 changes, I think it was, for the Italy game during the 2019 Six Nations. Wales won the game. As long as Wales are winning these games, then there's no issue. Now, if they lose and he's made all these changes, then he could have a bit of egg on his face. But until that happens, I don't think there's an issue with it.
It could be a very large egg.
Well, there's actually a comment, I'll see if I can find it, which is asking, are Georgia of 2020 the Romania of 1988? Now, I remember the Western Mail front page, obviously this is before I was born, The Monday after said R.I.P. Wales. He's hoping we don't.
I was there, Benjamin. I was on the East Terrace. I'm always there. I was there on the East Terrace. It is, without question, one of the darkest days I've ever known in Welsh rugby. It was absolutely awful. That whole autumn was awful. Jonathan Davis went north pretty much straight after it, and it was like the world had ended in Wales. It was terrible. They weren't a bad side, actually, Romania, that period. And I say I watched Georgia against Scotland and England. They're pretty limited. Wales beat, when Matt was out there for the World Cup, that was one of Wales' better performances in an attacking sense of the World Cup. They were very good against Georgia. And if I remember rightly, unpicked them with that line off 10, wasn't it? Just cutting through inside ball. Josh Adams caused carnage. So you would think that they would be looking to sort of utilize. Now you can imagine Louis Ritz-Ahmed doing the role, coming off his wing, quite devastating, because I've seen him do that a few times for Costa, where he hits the ball off 10, just coming around the corner off his wing. And if they haven't learned how to deal with that Welsh defensive attacking line, they could be in trouble again. But they're not a fantastic side, which again puts it into another context. If Wales don't produce against them, which actually they didn't do the first time Wales ever played them, when it was the game in which there was all the palaver over the scrum at the end, if I believe. It was a very, very tight affair. In many ways, one of those typical November games against Tier 2 teams where you make lots of changes and things are really stutter along and you creep through. I remember Japan, I think in 2016, drop goal from Sam Davis to win the game. So you can have that kind of autumn game. And then you can have the kind where I think it was Tonga a year or so ago, where those were, I think, scored about 9-10 tries and were excellent. Seb Davis, fantastic in number 8 that day, actually. So these kind of games can go both ways, and I think it's fairly clear which way Mr. Pivac would like you to go.
I suppose that brings us on nicely to the final part of this show, which is predictions. How do we see it going, is the question. Start with you, Matt.
Well, it's tough, isn't it? You know, Simon touched on it there. You know, we've seen, much changed teams in the past struggle. It's very difficult for them to find a rhythm. You made a really good point, Ben. These are decisions now that are going to define Wayne Pivac's career as a Welsh head coach. You know, if this goes wrong, it's going to be he's going to be in big trouble. But as Simon pointed out, if this is a watershed moment, these could be the players that ultimately take the Welsh team forward for the next 4 years, or and beyond. A lot of them, we got teenagers in this side. But something I pointed out this week as well, Wayne Pivac's got a break clause in his contract next November. If things aren't going right now, you ain't going to see the next World Cup. So you can plan for the next World Cup all you want, but he's got to get there. So just to bring it round to Saturday, it's a really difficult one to predict. Wales should win, right? Let's just say that. They should win. There's too much quality in this side. You would hope that the problems up front will be solved. We all agree that this is probably a better scrummaging set piece front five to cope with the area where Georgia are probably traditionally at their strongest. So if they get a platform, which they should, the back line should really, even if they play badly, have enough to score a couple of tries and get a win. Now, I think Wales will win, and I think it will probably be that sort of scrappy, error-strewn, missed timing of runs and passes kind of performance that we can see at times. So I think Wales will win. It'll probably be close. I don't think Georgia, they've shown us nothing really that should concern Welsh rugby fans, apart from the fact that we do have a history of causing ourselves a few problems in Wales. So I think it'll probably be Georgia might get a score. Wales will probably score 3 or 4 tries. So you're looking at something in the region of 20, 24, 8. There you go. That's a specific score for you.
What about you, Simon?
28-10. 28-10 for me. And I was alarmingly close with the Ireland prediction last week. So I hope I'm reasonably close this time. Then Wales do win. I mean, would that satisfy people at 28-10 or 24-8, as Matt called it?
Don't think so, mate.
It'd be a halfway house, wouldn't it? It would be a meh, MEH, I believe young people spell it. One of those ones, not quite knowing what to make of it. People would know what to make of it if this young run riot, and they'd know what to make of it if they lose or win by just a point. But I think it'll probably be something a bit more middling. And it's lastly for me, and it's funny what you touched on there, Matt, about the legacy. He might have brought through players like Tompkins, Johnny Williams, Will Rowlands, and youngsters who are getting their first chance under him. And he might be gone, and there might be someone else's legacy. I like Wayne Pivac, right? I've always got on well with him. Good to chat rugby about. And you don't like to see anyone going through a really tough time in any job. And I'd be pleased for him if things did come together this week. But you just want to see a building on some of the little sparks of hope you saw in that second half against Ireland, where you did perhaps start to see some of that attacking fluidity. Without the end result, little sparks of it. I just love to see that. But then it's difficult because it's an entirely new team. So it's the most fascinating, obscure game of rugby I think I've seen for a long time.
Just as a quick point to finish on, Ben, right? Wayne Pivac is going to have to, at the end of this campaign, he's going to have to speak to the board at the WRU. And if not directly, they're going to have internal meetings as a coaching staff where they all sit down and assess how this campaign has gone. If this Georgia game is the only game that he's won, and they've won it by a scrappy performance and a couple of points, if his excuse is to turn around and say, well, we might have lost all our games, but at least we brought through a few youngsters against Georgia, that's not going to save him, is it? So the pressure is on in that sense, because it's, to answer Simon's point on whether people will be satisfied with the scorelines we've just put out there, I don't think they will be. I think the main thing that's going to satisfy Welsh fans and probably the hierarchy at the WRU, because if they're not concerned, they should be, is a good performance and a comfortable victory. Now, it's very difficult to predict if that's going to happen. As Simon said, it's probably not going to be a resounding victory. It's probably not going to be a disaster. Well, it may be a disastrous loss, but we all think it's going to be somewhere in the middle. And I don't know if that's going to satisfy everybody, and particularly the ones that are important.
Strangely, I think this is the sort of game where, and it might not affect saving Pivac in the long term, but it's the sort of game where Wales could honestly easily run up a decent score. A bit like the 42-0 win over Italy at the start of the Six Nations. I think maybe this team, the way Pivac plays, it could be more suited to run up scores against teams who are poorer than them. A bit sort of flat track bully like, but not competing well enough in the big games and not having enough resolve in the big games, as we've seen over the year. So it wouldn't shock me if Wales went out and put 40-odd points on Georgia like Scotland and England has done. It wouldn't shock me at all. This is a young, exciting team. If they get half the platform up front, which literally haven't done over the last couple of weeks, but this pack looks better suited to doing the basics well and to get that platform. It wouldn't shock me if they ran up a big score. The problem then is you're sort of in a halfway house for the England game. If you trust that team, if you did that, you go back to what you know from the performance, the players that you know. And that they're good. You're going to get a full selection if you think it's halfway house for that team. But it'll be interesting to see how they do it.
Absolutely. Ben, there's just a few issues here, Ben, with your microphone. It sounds like you're underwater, I think. But I think the gist of what you've
been hacked.
Must have been hacked.
Oh, there you go. You're back. But I guess the gist of what you just said is that you think this team has got the potential to rack up a score if they get on top.
I'm sure it was a very good point.
I have breaking news for you. I've just looked at the weather forecast for Saturday in Llanelli. 69% chance of precipitation. I'm not sure that's what this team selection needs.
I'm not sure I've ever covered a game at Parc Scarlets and it's been dry. Seriously, I've been in this job nearly 7 years now.
God's own country, Matthew. God's own country.
Yeah, that's not good news.
Well, with that update from Derek Brockway, I think we'll call it a day for today's show.
Simon, it's not Brockway.
Sorry, keep getting the names mixed up. So that's it for today's show. But you can catch all the latest news on Wales Online.